to the Breaking Muscle podcast. I'm your host, Tom McCormick, and today I'm joined by Eric Helms. Eric is an accomplished natural bodybuilder, world-renowned coach, and fitness educator. Last year, he competed multiple times on the bodybuilding stage, but in 2020, he set himself the challenge of competing in 3 different strength sports: weightlifting, strongman, and powerlifting. In this episode, we discuss how he has juggled the competing demands of these different sports. This episode is absolute gold for anyone who competes in multiple sports, does CrossFit, or plays a sport and wants to know how your gym-based training needs to sit alongside and complement your sport practice and competition. So, without further delay, it's on with the podcast. All right, guys, so as I said in the introduction, absolutely delighted to be joined by Eric Helms today. Eric, how are you doing?
I'm better now that I'm talking to you, Tom.
Of course. I mean, actually, no one's ever said that before, but I appreciate it nonetheless. So Eric's best known as a bodybuilding coach, a bodybuilder, and sort of a fitness educator. Despite all of that, we're maybe not going to touch on much of that at all, and we're going to focus on your current training for 3 different events: powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting, and a strongman competition. I'm not sure if that's the right order of chronologically when you're doing them, but, well, first of all, why?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I would best describe myself as just someone who is way too obsessed with one thing, which is lifting. And I think that's influenced my intellectual pursuits, my career, and my personal pursuits as an athlete. So I think a lot of people know me depending on which one of those Venn diagrams of lifting they crossed into. So if they're in the bodybuilding scene, they'll have seen some competition picture of me or heard me talk about bodybuilding coaching. If they're powerlifting, they might have heard me talking about cutting weight or coaching Bryce Lewis or something like that. If they're weightlifting, they probably haven't heard of me because that's something that I'm the least good at and the least experienced with, and strongman is my newest venture. But to me, they all fall under the umbrella of lifting stuff, which I love. So yeah, I find that a huge component to longevity in the sport, improvement, and just enjoying it and integrating with my life is finding new ways to express myself under that same umbrella. Mm-hmm. And I remember back in 2006, I actually first looked into amateur strongman competitions. And this was in the early burgeoning days. And I remember myself and Alberto Nunez, one of my partners at 3D Muscle Journey, we were looking at it. And the lightweight class, there's 2 weight classes for men. There was the under 125 kilo and the over 125 kilo.
Okay.
So considering he and I were in the off season and I was like 90 and he was like, 85, we were both like, so we're going to be at a distinct disadvantage. Then we actually looked at the events and we were going to be zeroing half of them. So I kind of put that on the back burner. Like there's nothing wrong with participating in a sport, knowing you're not competitive, especially when you start. But it's hard to argue that I felt like I'd be participating if I couldn't even do half the events for a single rep.
Yes.
So anyway, the strongman thing had to, wait for me to become a stronger individual, to actually become a strong man, if you will, or stronger man. And for the sport to grow to the point where they had opportunities for lightweight class individuals in that. Weightlifting was something that I've always respected, always loved, and I got into late once I actually came out to, or was planning to come out to New Zealand to do the research components of my academic career, and I really wanted to get more exposure to the broader S&C world. So I started picking up weightlifting in late 2011, early 2012, and I went through a 2-year period of competing in it out here, and then stepped away because it was interfering too much with powerlifting and I had a hip injury. And now I've come back to it. And my main goal with weightlifting is to just actually look like a weightlifter. Even if the weights are light, I don't want to be power snatching. I don't want to be, almost getting a press out command every time I do a jerk, etc. So to me, it's just like I want to become proficient in these highly technical movements because I respect the sport so much, and that'd be cool. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's the why for each one of them. The challenge that I have for 2020, because I just did bodybuilding in 2019, something to keep me really motivated, is that I want to do a weightlifting, strongman, and powerlifting competition in that order in 2020 and not get hurt. And that's kind of my goal. And the upper echelon of that goal, I have gradations, is to actually improve my previous weightlifting and powerlifting total in doing so.
Yes. Okay. Interesting. And obviously not hit 0 reps in the strongman events.
Correct. Yes. Not zero anything.
I'm right in saying I believe that at the end of last year you did a strongman competition, or whether it was a full strongman comp, but certainly some events. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. So strongman's a really interesting sport because it's so eclectic. It's kind of like heavy CrossFit, and there are multiple different organizations. It's different region to region, and that's I mean no disrespect to CrossFit. Like some of the stuff they do on a rower or the endurance events I wouldn't even be able to do. So but yeah, there are many ways it could be expressed. For example, there's a competition called Static Monsters, which is a max deadlift. It's actually not just a straight deadlift. It's like an actual deadlift plus a log press. So it's kind of in the format of a weightlifting or powerlifting comp, and you just post a total. There are sometimes these cool single event exhibition-y style things. And then there's the standard, which is 4 or 5 events that takes a full day. And then there's like the big comps like Nationals or the Arnold or things like that, where you might have a weekend, a 2-day meet. So I did a stone and truck pull kind of exhibition-y style competition, which was basically a max stone. So it was kind of like run like a powerlifting meet with a 1.2 meter bar. You get the heaviest stone over it, you get 5 attempts. And then there was also a prize money based who could pull this truck. And it was independent of weight class. So me being an under 90 kilo guy going against super heavies, I just did it for fun to see how far I can get the truck. So that was my first foray. That was 4 weeks after my last bodybuilding show. So I was just kind of trying to distract myself from donuts, and using those donuts to my advantage. And then in October, about 4 weeks after that, so 8 weeks after my season, I did a kind of a Static Monsters event. It was a strongman deadlift log press. So it wasn't actually Static Monsters, but it was similar. So that was kind of me meeting the community, getting a feel for it. And getting involved. I started training at a strongman gym on 1 or 2 days a week. And then I was like, okay, this is really cool, a lot of fun, great community. Now I want to do a proper full medley event in 2020.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So in a second, I want to explore exactly your approach to training for these things. But actually, I want to getting some context. You made reference to last year was bodybuilding. You were prepping for a long period of time. A large chunk of 2019 was dedicated towards that. So that I think maybe gives us some context. Is it because as a natural bodybuilder, competing year on year is tough, but you've got that competitive spirit, you need another channel, and that's why these all fall together so perfectly for you?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of framing it. Like just to give people an idea of the kind of progress you make after you've been in the game a while as a drug-free competitor. So, for example, and I'll give the bodybuilding and the powerlifting reference. That's probably where most of your listeners come from. So my stage weight in 2011, the last time I competed before I started working on my research degrees and then came back to the sport, was about a kilo less than my stage weight this time, 8 years later, and I was leaner. So we're talking, I probably gained if I'm generous, 4 kilos of muscle in the last 8 years,
Mm-hmm.
So that's basically a pound a year. And that's the kind of thing that, not like I wasn't working hard for it either. There was like a hip surgery involved at some point. There was, multiple periods of gaining and then cutting and then gaining and cutting. So it was certainly a hard fought 3 to 4 kilos of muscle.
Yes.
On the powerlifting side of things, if you go to like open powerlifting, look at Eric Helms, A, you'll be disappointed, but B, you'll see that my first competition, I posted a 1,200 pound total. And then within a year, I was up to 1,300. And at that time, I remember thinking, oh man, I'm making great progress. 5 years from now, I'll be 1,600 and competing at a high level. This was back when 1,600 actually would have been competing at a high level. Now it's just about as impressive as a 1,200 was back then. So anyway, I have not yet hit a 1,400 pound total.
Okay.
I've gotten close, So I've totaled in the high 1,300s. So there was the learning curve, strength curve, whatever you want to call it for lifting is like this, and then it really plateaus and you're grinding for every kilo. So I do think I probably will hit a 1,400 total, just like a 36-40 kilo total at some point. But I do think it's going to take some more dedicated, specific, uninjured period of time in powerlifting. So it's just very interesting to me. So that's why some of the appeal of these other movements and other ways of competing are attractive to someone who's now like turning 37 next month and has been lifting for 15, 16 years. So yeah.
Absolutely. I think, well, that highlights sort of the diminishing returns that apply to all aspects of strength sports. But also, presumably, because weightlifting and strongman, you're more of a beginner in those, progress is faster. That's quite rewarding. I mean, I think probably one of the most important things for motivation is progress, and they almost work in like a positive spiral. So do you feel that you're sort of more enthused and motivated by your training when you're seeing that progress a little bit more frequently? And well, basically, it's cool to be able to add a few kilos every week to your lifts.
100%.
It feels like some newbie gains to some extent.
Absolutely, and it is. I think there's, if you look at some of the research, not to nerd out too much, but if you look at high-level powerlifters and you do some cross-sectional research on them, and you look at, okay, let's take the totals of all these elite-level powerlifters, and then let's take a look at their total body mass, muscle thickness, cross-sectional area, and muscle thickness at certain specific sites related to competition, you see a very strong relationship between muscle size and what discriminates a higher total. If you do 1RM testing in an elderly population that's untrained and you look at muscle mass, the relationship pretty much goes away. So once all else is equal, once you've maximized a lot of the technique, the neuromuscular adaptations, the thing that's going to make the difference is the raw material. How much contractile tissue do you have? So I think, for me, especially with less complex lifts like the power lifts and with bodybuilding, I'm pretty much looking to make fine-tuning improvements. Like maybe I could do a body part specialization cycle. Maybe I can tweak my posing. Maybe I can get a little leaner a little earlier and eat up and peak a little better. Like when I looked at I shut down my 2019 season, even though there was a few more opportunities for me to get a WNBF Pro card because I had lost to the overall winner a couple times. And then anytime I placed second, it was because the person who beat me was just bigger. Mm-hmm. So I was diced, I was peaked well. So I was like, what I really need is another couple of years to see if I can just tip the scales in my favor.
Another 8 years.
Yeah, exactly. You'll see me sometime around the heat death of the universe. I'll come back huge. Yeah. And by huge, I mean like another kilo. So but on the other hand, weightlifting. So for example, my coach, his name is Stas Chileev, my current coach, and if you look at his back squat numbers, he's similarly strong as I am at my peak in powerlifting, yet he's put up nearly a 190 clean and jerk and like a 155 snatch. Mm-hmm. So he is someone who has, if you look at kind of those ratios, he's maximized at the time when he was competing at like the Commonwealth Games level. He maximizes his technique and performance for his strength. But on the other hand, my numbers are basically, if you'd like cut his in half, not quite that bad, but like my best snatch is like a power snatch in 90, 86 in competition. My best clean and jerks, 114, 115. And I'm close to surpassing those now training with that. But I'm so far away from my best squat of like 225, 222, or my best front squat of 170. There's a huge discrepancy. You can see that I am strong enough to be a competent weightlifter, but I'm simply not a competent weightlifter. So when I figure something out, sometimes it's 5 kilos, right there. And that just doesn't happen in powerlifting anymore. So that is very cool. Another really interesting thing is that while weightlifting, bodybuilding, and powerlifting are very much they're like a dog show. Like if you go to a dog show, there are certain breeds and certain categories they're just going to win, and there's no training about it. Like, I mean, obviously there is some training, but you can't bring a mutt into that and be like, I've trained him very well. They're like, get this person out of here. So at the highest levels of bodybuilding and weightlifting and powerlifting, you start to really see a homogeneous look to people, and there's only a couple pathways to high performance. But in strongman, you'll see short people, you'll see tall people. I used to have the privilege and pleasure of working with Singapore's strongest man back in the 2012-ish period. And this was one of the guys who, on the pure strength events, he would place around the bottom, but he was so athletic at the time, like tire flips, loading events, running. He'd won Singapore's strongest man multiple times because he could leverage that. So it's very much dependent on who shows up, what the events are, and what your strengths are. So, for example, me being kind of light for my height, I'm pretty good at stones, kind of right out of the gate. Like I'm 6 foot in the 90 kilo class, and I've done a 125 stone over bar with a little bit room to spare after just 4 weeks of training. Like that's not bad. It's not amazing by any means. Don't get me wrong. But being 6 foot and 80 kilos does not help you in bodybuilding, So yeah, so it's kind of cool to find ways to leverage what my body might be best at, to put that together and cobble it together into a performance, and then pick and choose which competition I want to do based on what's available. So it's interesting. It gives you a little more ways to find success.
Yes. Okay, absolutely. I think strongman's kind of the curveball in this mix. So I'd like to address that in a second. But quickly talking about that rate of progress you're seeing with the weightlifting, it's almost as if you might get quicker than the traditional newbie gains because you have that horsepower, for want of a better phrase, because you've got the muscle mass and now it's just a skill. Whereas a lot of people starting out may also need to develop the strength base and the skill. So in some respects, you can tell me if this is happening, but your rate of progress should be quite sharp in there.
Yeah, in theory. I think it's a little different when you start at like 28 versus when you start. Like if I was if I'd played like football in high school and I'd gotten to a 2 times body weight squat and then transition, I think that absolutely would be the case. But I had certain adaptive characteristics, mobility restrictions, and that initial level of strength can be good or bad depending on the approach you take. And I think, unfortunately, early on in my weightlifting, not the earliest on, but kind of in the midpoint, I was really just thinking, okay, if the lift is legal, it's good.
Right.
And I was ingraining bad habits. I was lowering my ceiling while going up to reach it, instead of going, no, let's do this properly. Let's get a faster turnover. Let's get a good third pull. Let's not power when I could be doing it properly. And like my jerk timing, my turnover and the snatch, those were things that I'm only now figuring out now, even though it is 2020 and the first time I tried weightlifting was late 2011. So I think your strength can hinder you if you let it be what you're leveraging, instead of going, right, let me just really, really focus on my technique. And I think I've got the approach right now, like the tact we're taking is, right, the strength is there. Let's just do specific exercises that help you in the motor learning phases of the movements that you're deficient in. So I think that has been really effective, and I've been shoring up a lot of weaknesses and having a lot of light bulb moments. So that's a lot of fun. But weightlifting's really interesting. PRs don't feel like I've finally pushed myself hard enough and recovered and had a good day to where I've gained strength. It's more like, oh, I finally got my body to understand what I'm trying to get it to do and put it together. So it's very cerebral. I don't like I love training with a bunch of people for powerlifting or bodybuilding, but when I weightlift, I prefer to have like less distractions, be able to be kind of in the moment. And it's just a very different feeling for me. And that may change over time as the movements become more automatic, but I'm not quite there yet. So
okay, yeah, that's an interesting take. And I suppose the pursuit of progressive overload weight on the bar can be quite intoxicating. So when you can almost muscle your way through, it's quite tempting to chase that, and actually having to take that step back and realize that's not the long-term path to the best performance is quite interesting.
Yep.
And then, so now let's looking at this strongman, because you made reference to CrossFit, and before we chatted, I kind of thought of that because you've got powerlifting and weightlifting. They're not the same, but there's probably a lot more carryover from one to the other. You're working on one rep max in the lifts, whereas as you say, in a strongman, you could be doing any kind of medley. You might be working for a couple of minutes. The energy system's different, and it really seems like that's the curveball that really takes some understanding and managing when putting the training together. First of all, with the competition you're going to do you know all the events in advance?
Yes, but not as far in advance as would be amazing.
Right, okay.
So a lot of the times you'll have 2 to 3 months once you know all the events that are out. Sometimes, depending on CrossFit, it's a lot less time than that. And Yeah, so strongman competitions, they release it at some point in advance when you find out. And because you really do have to kind of trial it and run like a pilot study to promote one of these things to make sure that it is possible, it's feasible, the equipment won't break with a bunch of people doing it. Is it time efficient? Do we have the space for it? Do we have the spotters? Do we have the rep counters? All that. So there's a lot more moving parts when you have kind of like this medley track event style strength competition. So it is understandable that there'll be some lag time. So right now, I know all the events and only one is still in the air a little bit. I know what the movement is, but we don't know if it's going to be for reps or max. So yeah, and you're right. There is some distinct similarities between weightlifting and powerlifting. The overall competition format is quite similar. Like you said, the energy systems are the same, and the style of training and the style of competition share some similarities because you are simply trying to put up your best shot at a 1 rep max. You're playing the Price is Right with your thoughts on what is your 1 rep attempt on the day. Now, interestingly, strongman is very different from both in terms of the energy systems and the demands on the day, but there are some biomechanical similarities to one or the other depending on what's going on. So typically, even though like strongman has become much more, the barrier to entry has been lowered. If you look at the numbers at anything beyond a novice comp, you're kind of expected to already have intermediate level overhead strength, squat strength, and deadlift strength to just get in there and do something and not zero events. So the history of strongman is probably what causes that. If you were to go back and get on YouTube and look at some of the competitions from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, especially the earlier ones, you'll see they'll pit an Olympic shot putter against a champion powerlifter, against a silver medalist weightlifter, against a lineman from American football. So it was kind of like, we have all these places where people are considered quote unquote strong. Let's put them together in this kind of this random, Highland Games-esque style competition and see who's strong. And it's only become in the last decade or two where it's become people are actually specialist athletes for the sport of strongman or strongwoman. But so the echoes of that are there in that it's like you're expected to have a higher training age overall in the gym in terms of strength to go into a strongman competition. Like you can absolutely go into a powerlifting competition and do the bar plus collars. That's fine, and you will be cheered for and appreciated, and it's all good. I think that, there are questions as to whether that's the best way to approach it or not, but I think there's a much lower bar of entry for weightlifting and powerlifting. So strongman, the primary things that you need to be good at as far as static movements is your overhead strength and picking stuff off the ground. So it actually favors people with a weightlifting background a little more because that's all you do is you get things off the ground over your head. And then the components that are kind of absent from both powerlifting and weightlifting are the carry events, the loading events, and some of the very specific things. Like even if you do a lot of deadlifts and front squats, there's really nothing like a stone except a stone. So I think the typical approach to strongman competitions is you'll need to be a strength generalist who's getting pretty damn strong at reps and singles. And then once you know there's an event, then you train for the event.
Yes. Okay, that makes sense. So with that all said, how is a typical week structured for you? How many days a week are you training? And how much love is being given to the specific lifts? Are you phasing them in and out and prioritizing the powerlifts as that event approaches, et cetera, et cetera?
Exactly. It's exactly that last component. I'm taking a phasic approach. So as soon as I set this goal at the end of 2019, I started giving love to them all, if you will. And I created a baseline template of kind of like, I'm not preparing for any competition, but I'm trying to improve my competency in all of them. And I thought about what was essentially, where was there overlap? Both in a good way and a bad way. Like which things can give me progress in multiple sports simultaneously, and I'll emphasize those movements. And then where is there a lot of overlap to where I'll need to put one on like Saturday and the other one on Tuesday to give me the most recovery. And then which one do I need to modulate the volume on, et cetera. So I kind of had my baseline template, which was I would train an overhead movement, a carry movement, and a rotating strongman specific movement on Saturdays. And then I would have 2 days where I would do a bench movement. I would have a day for snatch and clean and jerk, and then I would sprinkle in, squats and deadlifts as they kind of crossed everything throughout that, depending on what other things I was doing. So I had this, what Dan John would probably call my park bench workout, the one where park bench versus bus bench. The analogy he uses is the bus bench. There's a schedule. The bus is coming. You're going to get on it and you're going to a specific location. But if you go to a park and sit down, you're there to hang out. You're there to look around. It's not that the training isn't serious. You're definitely enjoying the park. But there's not a specific competition you're training for. So my park bench quote unquote style training was a relatively even distribution of all three, with some bodybuilding accessories, and a lot of them serve to accessorize to the others. Like obviously, if I need to get good at a log press or a axle press or a monster dumbbell, doing a jerk is not going to hurt that. It's going to help it, if anything. A squat is going to help everything. A deadlift is going to help everything. So there was a fair amount of carryover all around. Then basically what I did was I started to pay attention to the competition schedule, and I thought what was the best way to space things out. And there's fortunately a fair amount in Auckland, where I'm from, Auckland, New Zealand right now, or where I live, I should say, of competitions in all of them. They've all become pretty popular in the last couple of years. So there is a weightlifting competition on April 18th. This is just a small club comp for me to get back on the platform. And I figured that doing weightlifting first was probably smart. It's where I have a lot of room to grow. And it's probably the least injury risky of them for me. And it has the least amount of sink of post comp, like I'm weak for a week or two. So weightlifting on April 18th, and then Auckland Strongest Man is on May 2nd, so 2 weeks later. And then I'm not planning on doing a powerlifting competition until November, because that's the one where I have the most background in. It's going to take me the most specificity, the most amount of time, and the most specific planning and investment of time and energy to peak and improve in powerlifting. So essentially, right now that I'm I think 6 and 8 weeks out from the weightlifting and the strongman competition respectively, I'm training predominantly for weightlifting and strongman with just 2 days a week of benching to maintain that skill, and just keeping faith that all of the stone, clean and jerk, snatch, Hummer deadlift, monster dumbbell stuff is going to keep my squat and deadlift. The monster dumbbell, you got to get from the floor up to your shoulder. So anyway, the goal is to kind of have this dual peak for weightlifting and strongman, and then lick my wounds, and then plan a 5 to 6 month period of training to peak my powerlifting total in a year. And then for that phase, I'll be doing the bare minimum amount of weightlifting and strongman to not regress. So essentially, it's putting things on the back burner, if you will.
Yes.
And the cool thing that I found is that for skills that I'm completely new to, even just once a week working up to a heavy single is enough to improve it. And that's one of the times where we don't like to talk about in the strength sport community, or especially in the evidence-based community where we're obsessed with volume. What is the minimum dose you need to improve a skill or maintain a skill? Because why would you ever do that, right? But I'm in a unique scenario where trying to improve everything optimally is basically trying to take a trip to the hospital. So instead, I'm looking at, all right, how do I combine these all to get the summation, the net best gain across these sports, and the peak at the right time for each? And there is definitely something to be said for taking a minimum effective dosage for some of these movements, especially when I have such a low threshold for gains. And doing some of these competition movements in weightlifting and strongman, or their variations, even once a week, gets me almost as much as I would if I did them for a full schedule, in terms of the relative amount of gains I could be making, just because my skill level is quite low.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And I think an interesting point you made about training to maintain, because actually that can be done at very low volumes. So given that there is the carryover, that helps. But presumably the sort of squatting and deadlifting you need to do to support the strongman training is going to be enough to maintain your strength with regards to powerlifting. And then I hadn't realised you had until November for the powerlifting one. So I was initially thinking you weren't necessarily chasing what was the total we were shooting for here? That 1400 total, but now with that run up to it, you have enough concentrated time on powerlifting. Presumably that is the goal to tick that off this year.
Exactly. Yeah. And for me, even a 2.5 kg improvement on my total, I'd be happy with. So I might not hit that 1400, but I think my best total to this point is 617. So 620 or higher, and I'm a happy man.
Okay.
And even just getting back on the platform since my prior hip surgery and doing, like, I'm not going to be disappointed if I don't hit that. It'll just be like that would be ticking off all my goals. And yeah, no offense to those of the redheaded persuasion, but basically the redheaded stepchild of my training right now is the bench press. It doesn't really fit into the plan for the events in strongman that I'm doing. It almost never does, nor does it help my weightlifting. So essentially, my powerlifting training right now is that 2 days a week when I do accessory movements, I do 3 sets of bench. I work up to a heavy one, a couple back off sets, or I just do 3 repetition-based sets. So I'm really only doing 6 sets of bench a week, and that's kind of holding me right around like a 135 to 145 max bench, which is fine, because that if I can maintain that, I know that from there I can build to the best I've done in the 150 to 160 kilo range.
Yes.
So.
Well,
yeah.
Presumably to some extent, maintaining that level of strength on such a low volume opens up a bigger window of opportunity for it to then climb. And of the 3 power lifts, how does the bench rank for you compared to deadlift and squat?
Yeah. So my best squat in competition is 222.5. My best bench in competition is a 150, and my best deadlift is 250. So they're all kind of mediocre. And I think I do have a little more room to grow in the bench, because I've done a 165 touch and go. I was at a higher body weight, but I went through a bench specialization cycle, and that worked quite well.
Right.
I have not gotten the same payoff in returns when I've done squat or deadlift specialization cycles. Those I just kind of have to treat like a finicky plant and just let it grow at the rate it's going to grow. So kind of my game plan is to keep slowly building the squat and the deadlift, which I think will be nice when I don't have to combine that with other odd variations in the movements like a Hummer tire deadlift, stone, snatch, clean and jerk, etc. And then really emphasize the bench press to try to move that up past the 150 kilo range. So I'm training high bar on the squat, both from prior hip issues and for Olympic weightlifting. I'm hoping when I convert to low bar, I'll be able to get back into that 220-ish range. I think the deadlift is going to maybe tick up just from all of the work off the floor I'm doing for strongman and weightlifting. And then, kind of specializing, I hope it'll get a nice bump there. And then my hope is that those 2 things will kind of just happen. Yeah. Of course, I'm going to have a peaking cycle on a periodized plan and all that, but then I can really push the bench to get kind of back to where I was, maybe a little bit beyond for squat and deadlift, and then a substantial PB on the bench. And that's my strategy, at least based on my history and where I'm at now for improving the total.
Mm-hmm. Actually, so you mentioned peaking there, and presumably for powerlifting, because you're closer to your potential, the peaks may be more important. I imagine that with the weightlifting, you may well peak, but to be honest, it might just be a case of, as long as you don't do anything stupid the week before, you can quite happily go in there and hit PBs. And then I suppose the question is, you've only got 2 weeks, so although there's the volume of work you'll do on your competition day with the weightlifting and the lack of eccentric means that you shouldn't be too sore. How are you thinking through those couple of weeks?
Yeah, so the way I'm seeing it, so I'll do the competition on the 18th, and I'll probably take a couple days off and just kind of recover. And then the end of the week following that, I will probably have a proper mock strongman meet on a Saturday. I'll go through, truck pull, Hummer tire deadlift, monster deadlift, and then stone load. And then I will taper for the week of the strongman competition. So I'll be training for both, probably modulating the strongman down just a little bit to make sure that I can handle the loading in weightlifting, and then recover from weightlifting at the same time. For those listening only, I'm trying two trends. That's weightlifting coming down while strongman comes up right after, as I'm fully recovered, say 72, 96 hours after the weightlifting comp. Then I'll be putting myself through a nice hectic mock meet for strongman, and then recovering from that. So it'll be a tight window, but like you said, I have quite a broad range that could be considered a peak. It's like you said, don't do something stupid, and you should be able to hit a PR or be at peak performance. But yeah, like you said, powerlifting, there's a lot more things that I have to manage and make sure I'm redlining it to the point where I'm not getting hurt or getting put in the hole, but actually making progress. So that's why I think that was a very apt description on your part. So thanks.
And then so for the powerlifting, what's the weight category that you need to hit for that?
Yeah, so I'll be in the 93s. And yeah, so it's a funny thing. The weight classes are all close, but not perfectly aligned, So in weightlifting, there's 96 and 89 now that the weight classes have changed. 89 I can definitely make, but that would require a little bit of dedicated effort and then a water cut. Similarly, strongman is 90 kilos. Mm-hmm. Now, I would normally never advise someone to cut for a sport that they are just starting in, like I am. But the thing is if I do the 105s, I simply am not at the point where I can I will zero some events. So it feels like I'm not competing. So to make the 90 kilo class now, it's a 300 pound or 136 kilo Atlas stone. I've done the one stone lower than that with a little bit of room to grow, so I know I won't zero that. It's a monster dumbbell with 55 kilos for reps. I've already done that at least for once in training, so I'm hoping for a handful of reps there. And you can't zero a truck as long as it moves a little bit. If I get a foot, I'm on the board. There's a distance recorded. And then the Hummer tire deadlift, if it's for reps, I'm very confident I'll get at least one based on the weights it will be. And if it's for max, I might have a low max compared to other people, but it's there. But if it's a 105 class, then there's one, potentially two events that I just don't complete. So I kind of have to make the 90 kilo class there. So anyway, I'm not trying to make the 89 for weightlifting, but I'm going to be like a light 96, and then if I get to around 93 or so, that's a non-difficult cut, water cut for me to make the 90 kilo class for strongman. And then I will let my weight come up as it does, maybe as much as 94, 95. So I don't want to cut any more than a kilo or two for powerlifting come November.
Okay, interesting. So I was going to say, or one of the questions I had was, presumably because body composition is not quite such a focus as it was for you last year, that the demands of this on you psychologically may be reduced, but also those around you, so your friends, your family. The prep for this, I imagine, interferes less on what they have to do than perhaps a bodybuilding prep would. You're nodding along, so I'm assuming that is the case. But of course, this 90 kilo one means that you have to at least pay a little bit of attention just to make sure that you're in touching distance. Is that one of the things that you've really found though with this? You can just focus on performance, and it doesn't interfere with other people's lives.
Yeah, and I would say that's true for me, but it's all relative for other people. Like if someone has never competed in physique sport and they have to cut, say, more than a couple kilos for a competition, they might experience that as quite difficult. There may actually be a dieting phase of a month, and then water loading and a 14-hour fasted period or something like that before weigh-ins. And to me, that is a minimal to negligible stress. Comparatively to dieting from December to August and dieting to the point where your body is going, you really shouldn't be doing this. And I told you that 4 months ago, and we're still doing this and making you feel terrible, versus just being a little annoyed that, instead of getting, like the full breakfast, you get eggs and toast with a side of salmon. Like that's about as annoying as it is. So kind of the game plan now, my body weight was in the mid 90s, like 95, 96, after the full rebound post competition from my bodybuilding season. And that's just, like I said, if I was strong enough to do the 105s in strongman, I would just walk in straight in, but I'm not. So I know I need to get myself down to around 93. So I'm basically doing a mini cut for February and slightly into March if I need to, as we are here. So I've got maybe another kilo or two. I'm going to slowly drop, and then I'm just going to hold there and water cut. And that's very different than dropping from 90 to 80,
Yes.
when 80 is, stride and glutes and veins in your hamstrings and stuff like that. So, it's negligible for me, but definitely for the people, it might be something that they would have to consider and change their loading around and consider. But I don't have to do a ton of work in a deficit right now or anything like that. That I think nutrition is too much of a concern. Mostly it's technique work at this stage. So.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. And so that's interesting. Of course, context and relative to the individual makes a big difference. So that makes perfect sense. Now, you talked about the potential of to come back on the bodybuilding stage, you need to add a few kilos. So first of all, do you have plans to compete again in bodybuilding? Okay. Yes. Nodding on. Do you have a time frame in mind for that?
Yeah, so I definitely do want to keep competing in bodybuilding. Bodybuilding is something, it's kind of like the story of Icarus and the sun. Like if you get too close to the sun and stay there, you burn up and crash the earth and die. So like I love it, but my first season was 2007. The next season was 2009. The next season was 2011. And, those were tactical decisions to some degree, and that in 2007 I knew, I needed to get leaner, and like everyone their first season, I didn't get lean enough. I didn't pose well. There's a lot of things I could have fixed immediately if I could, transport an experienced bodybuilder's brain into my body, and I would have placed higher and done a little better, but I simply was not big enough. 2009, I got bigger and got really lean, got close to doing really well, but still needed more time. So then I was competing every other season to make improvements. And then 2011, I won my first overall. I got pro card in the INBA, professional division to the PNBA. But anyway, and then I took a lot of time off because I knew if I wanted to compete with the pros in that organization, or like I actually chose if I wanted to try to get a pro card in the INBF, WNBF, which is a larger, more competitive natural bodybuilding organization, I would need to up my game. And I did up my game, and I was definitely in contention for a pro card. And if I just kept competing over and over and over again, I might have had one of those opportunities where I got one. But I think what made the most sense is that to take some time off and hopefully try to make some visible improvements to my physique rather than just the fine tuning. But it will take time, multiple years. And additionally, kind of the Icarus thing, it's not just tactical. It's also that you have to put yourself through a lot of physical, mental, and emotional stress to get into really, really good shape, even as an experienced bodybuilder. And burnout is a very common thing. And having, psychosocial side effects is a very common thing. So, having a negative relationship with food, having the people around you, like you said, undergoing stress, that's something I do my best to mitigate, but it's almost impossible to prevent completely. So for me, taking that time off allows me to kind of recultivate that passion and plan to have my life in a good situation. Like I'm going to travel less this year, and I'm going to, make sure that I have the brain and emotional space. So if I'm going to do it again, which I will, it will probably not be for at least a couple of years. So maybe like for my 40th birthday, like 2023 or something like that. Cool. And it gives me some good time to focus on, strongman, weightlifting, powerlifting in the meantime. Which you certainly don't shrink while you're doing those things. So
yeah. That's interesting. So I was going to say, in terms of that, obviously we know the time scales as a drug-free lifter to put on noticeable amount of size. That takes time, even if you're training purely, for that. So how much, if any, do you think doing these other events is taking away from a sense of optimal training, whilst obviously it's giving perhaps a lot the other way in terms of psychology, motivation, enthusiasm, and that relationship between the two? Presumably there's some kind of trade-off, and you have to find that sweet spot to eventually get to where you need to be, say, for 2023.
Tom, you framed that really well, because I think some people would try to put this in a box. They would try to contain optimal within this theoretical pie in the sky idea, to where it was like, well, if on paper, if you were doing all of your adaptive reserve and your mental focus was towards hypertrophy, and, obviously loading stones is going to be great for building my erectors and my glutes, but you don't do that for volume. It has a higher injury risk. It's practically not feasible. And you can make an argument that you could do 4 or 5 different exercises, hip thrust, a kickback, an RDL, and a back extension, and get much more hypertrophy and with lower total perceived exertion over multiple days, it could be better, and that is true. I will simply not deny that on paper I could create an optimal bodybuilding plan for myself to compete in 3 years from now, and that would probably be better. But the question is, like you said, is how do I keep myself engaged, motivated, and really excited? Because I think that has an absolutely important, probably quantifiable. If we look at kind of like the placebo, if I was actually to do a self case study and I had a magic wand to know all this data, I know that I get better results when I'm really excited about my training. And simply put, even though I think a lot of the times in the really hardcore communities, we kind of look at things as either it's optimal or it's nothing, And that's simply not the case. Like if you look at the research on the interference effect of doing cardio while weight training, if you do it really terribly and purposely try to cause the interference effect in research to investigate a mechanism, you see a slight slower rate of gains in hypertrophy, power, or strength. You don't see a regression, But in the bodybuilding community, it's, well, I don't want to take the stairs because I'll lose my gain, so I took the elevator. And it's like, that's not cardio. B, it's not doing anything. And C, even if it did, it would be slowing your rate of progress. So for me, I definitely know that training for strongman, which has an anaerobic component. Some of these events are 60 seconds long, and it has multiple different ways of expressing high levels of force, that I'm going to be growing. It's not going to be the perfectly tailored hypertrophy important for my physique development, but I think overall growth is a huge part of strongman competitions. And when you look at weightlifters, powerlifters, or strongmen who've been training for a while, they aren't small, They don't have intentional hypertrophy in a proportionate bodybuilding specific manner. But I mean, it's hard to think that I'm not hitting anything doing these three sports. If you throw in some calf raises and some bicep curls, actually, to be honest, there's a lot of bicep work in strongman. Like a truck pull, you're going to be really fatigued. Bicep injuries are really common in strongman anyway. So the point being is that I do still train for bodybuilding right now. It's that the number of slots that I have dedicated to it are less. So for me, I normally need to bring up my back, and that's kind of like the biggest part of my physique. And then although my delts are pretty well developed, especially if you see me from the side, I have a narrow frame. So the bigger delts I can get, the bigger lats I can get, always helps me. And it's kind of like they can't be too big. Same thing with my quads. So even though some of my best body parts are the things that I need to work on because of my frame, like they can never have too much. So I think, for one, a lot of my bodybuilding necessities line up with the strength sports I'm doing. And I do have a few slots here and there that I'm dedicating to it. So, for example, I still do calf raises twice a week. It's another weak point of my physique. I still do pull downs and rows, and then a ton of lifting heavy things. So, like, my back's getting a lot of work. I'm doing a lot of overhead work. My delts are getting a lot of work. I'm doing a lot of quad work, weightlifting and so it's basically I'm hitting everything I need to. I've got a little bit of dedicated time to it. I'm probably undergoing an unnecessary level of fatigue and probably higher injury risk for the training I'm doing than would be optimal. But is that trade-off worth it for being highly motivated, having goals, and having this drive to induce progressive overload? For me, it is. Is it what I would recommend someone else do? No, not unless your goal was to compete in three sports and then do bodybuilding later.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes. I think that trade-off's something that people really need to take into account. A lot of people, they go online, they're looking for optimal, and then, I mean, as part of the issue is sometimes they only have 3 hours available to train because their schedule's so busy. Is like a really simple example, and then they find a 6-day-a-week plan, and they're trying to find a way to make that happen. But like everything, this works on a continuum, and you've got to understand where you fall on that, where your goals are, and how committed you are to those, and the time frames of them. And as a little aside, one of my clients just had a photo shoot this weekend. The area from 2 years ago that really improved the most were his back and his shoulders. And last year he did 2 strongman competitions, and of course was doing all sorts of deadlift variations, stone lifts, etc., and a ton of overhead work. So I think certainly from his experience, it can actually work very, very effectively. And exactly as you're hoping to achieve, he was just so motivated to train the whole way through. Like basically put together 9 months of really good quality training, then transitioned to a cut to sort of display the physique. But he hadn't trained like a bodybuilder the whole year. It's just he was like, well, I've got my power belly now. I'd like to see what I look like without it, and it came together really, really well for him. And there were significant physique improvements in a 2-year period, where one of those years was basically training purely for performance in strongman competition.
Yeah, I think that's really, really well said. I don't have much to add to that. The only final small piece I would put in there is that this is probably something that makes sense for someone who has a muscular and strength-based build. The nature of the plasticity of muscle and how we retain the quote-unquote muscle memory, I think, is important here as well. So, for example, when I shifted into a pure bodybuilding offseason in 2018, I noticed that a few muscle groups that had been a little bit neglected from the way I was training blew up immediately and got back to where they were. And that is just the way it works. Muscle memory is a real thing. We maintain some of the machinery, if you will, at the cellular level to get back to the previous levels of muscularity you had. And of course, we also have all those motor patterns that are stored pretty long term if you've been lifting for a long time. So, getting back into doing, leg press and hammer strength movements and, RDLs and calf raises and arm work and stuff like that, it came back very quickly. And I think some people look at it as losing gains, but it's more like you're just kind of hitting pause, and then you can rapidly come back to it and get those characteristics and qualities again. So yeah, I think that's something to consider, is that sometimes we look at this from the lens of I'm always a newbie. Like if I lose these gains, it'll take exactly as long to rebuild that muscle or that strength. And that's just not the case.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Actually, interestingly, I've interviewed Brian Haycock a few weeks back, and he has his strategic deconditioning. And I've got Cody Hahn. I'm not sure.
Yeah, Dr. Hahn.
Lined up, and I know that he's done some research on sort of resensitization of muscle, and he's sort of teasing out that a little bit, and to some extent that will obviously carry over into this. And I think there's some fairly promising research on the fact that taking time away may actually long term potentially create the potential for greater progress. So perhaps as you're alluding to here, that's one of the factors, and people don't need to panic if a muscle group that's been neglected for a period of time it's on the back burner, but it will come back quickly. Don't panic and start throwing in outrageous volume for that. It'll come back pretty easily.
Well said. So
we're taking up, we're closing up on time. I don't want to take up too much of your time, Eric. So I've got some sort of quicker questions here for you. Either or. So to start those off, pizza or burger?
Probably pizza.
Chocolate or peanut butter?
Probably chocolate.
Beach holiday or city break?
Probably a beach holiday.
If you're having a steak, is it a fillet or a ribeye?
It's probably fish.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. I actually know that about you. All right, okay. So what fish is it?
Salmon.
Okay, smoked salmon, just salmon steak, salmon fillet.
Yeah, I prefer a fillet.
Okay.
Properly cooked, but a little bit on the rare side.
Okay, all right, there we go. That was the next one, rare or well done. So we answered that. Normally it's steak, and actually, despite me knowing and forgetting that you're the first person that's been what is the technical classification? You're obviously not a vegetarian, but
I have been a vegetarian. I was a lacto-vegetarian for a while, purely for ethical reasons. I don't think it's better for performance or health. I think it's more about the inclusion of vegetables rather than the removal of meat that is healthy. But yeah, I've shifted towards certain consumption of fish as well. So I'm basically a pescatarian.
Okay. Most
of the time. Yeah.
Okay, fine. So eggs, they're on the menu. Scrambled or poached?
Poached.
Okay, cool. Now, tell me something about you that we probably don't already know.
Let's see. You probably don't know that I was an Arabic linguist in the Air Force from 2001 to 2005. That was my prior career before I realized that listening to static in a windowless room for 12-hour shifts was not what I wanted to do with my life, and I started lifting weights.
There you go. I certainly did not know that. Okay, final question from me is, who should I interview next? If I have access to anyone, who would be the person I should get on the show next?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say Greg Knuckles, I'm a big fan of.
We've had Greg on just a couple of weeks ago, in fact.
Okay. Gabriel Fundero,
Okay.
Dr. Fundero would be a great choice as well.
Cool. All right, I'll make a note. Gut specialist, right?
I think she is known as that, but she's got a lot more expertise across a large range of things. She's competed in strength sport and physique sport. She's published papers. She's taught. She has a doctorate in nutritional science. She's done research on gut health, but she has some really interesting perspectives and has been doing a lot of work in the area of intuitive eating, health at every size, and kind of how that is misunderstood in the intersection with folks who have weight loss goals or performance goals.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I'll add her to the list of people we're trying to reach out to. Right, that's all from me. Eric, please take a moment just to let people know where they can find out a little bit more about you, the services you offer, and basically what's going on in your world.
Absolutely, yeah. So the best place to find anything that I'm involved with is at 3dmusclejourney.com. That's the number 3, the letter D, musclejourney.com. That is the natural bodybuilding service that I started with myself, Alberto Nunez, Brad Loomis, Jeff Alberts, and who we've also brought on Andrea Valdez as our operations officer with. And we also have support staff for mental, physical, and clinical nutrition stuff. And we have blog posts, a podcast, the 3DMJ Vault, where you can take courses. We've got a new course called Transitioning Away from Tracking for people who want to see if they can get a better handle on their nutrition without just rigidly tracking macros. And so there's a one-stop shop there. You can find links as well to monthly applications in strength sport, which is the research review with Greg Knuckles, as I brought up, and also Dr. Zerdos and Dr. Trexler. My books you can find links to there. And then the only other two things besides all that can all be found on 3D Muscle Journey is Iron Culture podcast with myself and Omar Isuf. And that is on pretty much all platforms. And then finally, you can follow me on Instagram at Helms3DMJ.
Fantastic. All right, well, we'll make sure all the links to those are in the show notes. That's all from me, Eric. Have a great day. Thanks for taking the time to chat.
My pleasure. Thanks, Tom.
That wraps up today's episode. Thank you so much for investing your time with us. We really appreciate it. If you enjoyed what you heard and took value from it, please do me a favor by heading to iTunes right now, subscribing to the show, and leaving a review. Positive reviews, like 5 stars, hint, hint, really help the ranking of the show and will help us to spread the word and keep getting top-class guests on. Make sure to follow Breaking Muscle on social media and me at Tom McCormick. That's TOMMACCORMICK on Instagram. Bye for now, and I'm looking forward to catching you on the next episode of the Breaking Muscle podcast.